I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I will be reviewing The Way of Kings, volume number 1 in Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archives. So let's get to it. To begin with, I just got a few personal stories about Brandon Sanderson and myself. Now, I'm a published writer. I run in the circles of the published writers. I've known Brandon Sanderson since before he was published. I remember in Salt Lake City there's a science fiction convention back in the early 2000s called Conduit, and David Farland, the author of the Rune Lords, held a small little panel in just a room, and he invited a select few of kind of wannabe authors. I was included in that group, and so was Brandon Sanderson. And this was before Brandon Sanderson or any of us had been published, and we got a lot of writing advice from David Farland, and I do remember in that little meeting that David Farland announced that Brandon Sanderson had just got a book deal with Tor, and that was for the book Elantris, and I was like, hey, that's cool. One of the guys has got a book deal. And then I found out years later, I waited for Elantris to come out, and so I was excited to see what it was all about. I got it and read it and thought it was good. And I was happy for the guy. And then I heard that, Robert Jordan passed away, and the Wheel of Time was passed on to Brandon Sanderson. At that point, as a young writer who was trying to get published, I experienced a little jealousy, I got to admit. I was like, who does this Sanderson guy think that he is, that he could take over for Robert Jordan and finish the Wheel of Time? I mean, clearly I'm the guy for the job, not him. Well, let's just say that he did the job, and he did it fantastically. Did it better than I would have done, that's for sure. So props to the guy for that. I mean, it was fun to watch him go from a young writer with no prospects to a guy who got his first book deal to a guy who just became a mega star, And a lot of people, Sanderson's writing style is a little different from Jordan's, but that didn't matter. I think that Sanderson finished out the Wheel of Time series really well. And I will be on this channel in 6 months, a year, 2 years. I will be reviewing every Wheel of Time book also in order, but that's coming down the road. I've got all the Stephen King stuff to get through and everything, but we'll get to that eventually. I think that he did a great job I think Sanderson did a great job finishing out the Wheel of Time. I do think that The Way of Kings, which is what we're going to talk about today, is his magnum opus, is going to be his great literary achievement of all time, even surpassing Wheel of Time, I think, in the end. Let me just talk about my feelings on fantasy, just a few things. I'm not the type of fantasy fan that really likes high magic and a lot of magic systems, and I'm more of the George R.R. Martin sort of grimdark guy, and so you wouldn't think that I would like Brandon Sanderson or Way of Kings, because it's got a lot of high magic, it's got really complex magic systems, and it's kind of comic booky in a lot of ways, with a lot of the supernatural powers that a lot of these characters have and or going to have in the future. You can just tell it's coming, and that kind of thing never sits well with me. However, in this book, it's genius. It's absolute genius. I loved everything about this. The Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archives is absolute genius. I've read them all twice. I am rereading them again for my review series. So this is the third time I've read this, and I got to tell you, I learned something new about writing and world building and character craft every time I delve into this series. And so if you're a writer, I really suggest you study what Sanderson is doing in these Stormlight Archives books, because it's the future of fantasy. It really is. You got to know. Every one of these books is just enormous, and 1,400 page paperbacks. Look how big these are. And just chock full of world building and character development and everything you could want in a fantasy. And Sanderson hits the nail on the head, and he hits the ball out of the park, and all the other cliches just from the get-go. Right off the bat, this thing is fantastic. I think that once all 10 Stormlight Archive books are finished, it's going to likely go down as maybe the greatest fantasy series ever written. That's just my opinion, because I think the future is Brandon Sanderson, and I can't say enough about how much I love these. I appreciate the complexity of the world building. I learn a lot just from, as a writer at this point in my life, in my writing career, in my reading life. If I'm not learning something from the authors that I'm reading, I just don't read them. I've got to that point where if I think I can do better, I just kind of stop reading those authors. Sanderson, I will never be able to match what Sanderson's. I mean, my novels are complex. They're huge. They're as big as Sanderson's. But I learn everything. I learn something every time I pick up one of these Stormlight Archives books. That's how jazzed I am about this series. I think it's going to surpass the Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time. I mean, it's going to be one of the top. It's going to, if not the top, when all is said and done. And a lot of people, when they compared Sanderson's writing style to Jordan's a little too much, and I've done that myself. I think they do have a little bit of a writing style, and some people say that Sanderson's a little more pedestrian, but that's not true. Not in the case of the Stormlight Archives. He's got a real flair for words in this. He's a wordsmith. He knows exactly what he's doing every step of the way. Sanderson knows how to write. If Sanderson wanted to write flowery prose like George R.R. Martin or Tad Williams or Pat Rothfuss, he would. But that's not his goal, and he knows that's not his goal, and he sets all that aside just for pure storytelling gold. Which, if you're in the mood for that, that's great. And if you're in the mood for Pat Rothfuss and the flowery prose, then you go over and you read Pat Rothfuss and the flowery prose, and you get the best of both worlds with two different authors. I think that Sanderson does a great job with this. You need to study. If you're a writer and you want to learn how to write, just study what Sanderson's doing. That's all I got to say. Let's get into some of the nitty-gritty. Well, I don't do spoiler reviews. I just do general plot outlines, and then I gush about the novels that I love on this channel. I don't really speak negative about a whole lot of things. Let's get into some of the basic thing. I mean, this is set in Sanderson's huge, enormous Cosmere universe, where every book and series he writes is set in the same sort of galaxy and universe, all on different planets, and they're all sort of semi-tied together a little bit. And so that's the setting of this. It takes place on another planet, although it's kind of a Fantasyland planet. But it's a crazy, wild, magical Fantasyland planet with a lot of stuff, with shard blades and void binding and shard plate and magical weapons and just magical spren and all sorts of things. I don't want to spoil any of what those things are, because I think the fun of reading Brandon Sanderson is discovering what all that stuff is on your own. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it. However, some of the characters, it's told through the point of view of several characters. The first of which is Kaladin, the sort of world-weary soldier who's been betrayed multiple times in his soldiering career, and he's now more or less a prisoner to warfare, and suffers from some post-traumatic stress, things like that. Great character. Shallan Davar, I think it's Shallan Davar. I don't know how you pronounce a lot of these, but I'm going to give it my best shot. She's an artist. She's a girl. She's kind of on a quest of her own. It's an interesting quest. And again, I don't want to spoil what the quest is, because part of the fun is discovering. And then there's the assassin, Seth Sun Villano. I think that's his name, Seth Sun Villano. He's the assassin, kind of gets the story kicked off in a grand fashion. Liked him, would have liked to see more of him in the books. I think we're going to get more of him as the books move along. And Dalinar Kholin, he's the brother of the murdered king, and I won't tell you who murdered that king, but, again, read it for yourself, discover it for yourself. He's one of the things that I loved about Dalinar was he's kind of like got this mystical side where he sees visions. He thinks he sees visions. He tells people he sees visions, and people think he's crazy. Like, no, man, you're nuts. You're a religious nut. But he's got faith and belief in these visions. And I really liked that interesting sort of interplay of religious belief and faith, and it's got a really good subtext with this character. And he's got a son, Adolin Kholin. He's a duelist, a sword fighter. Some great scenes that in this book and upcoming books with that. That's kind of the. There's another character, Wit, who's probably everyone's favorite. And I gotta say, just before I end this video, that The Way of Kings, I'm telling you, it's got the best closing scene, if not the best closing line, in all of fantasy literature. When I got to that very final line in this book, I was like, holy, I gotta read the next book. This ended on like just like a punch to like, oh, what have I been reading about this whole time? That's awesome. It's awesome. And you got to give Brandon Sanderson props for just the entire thing. Not only that, but each book, the hardcovers, I have all the hardcovers, I've got the paperbacks, just chock full of great art. Every one of them's got a Michael Whelan painting on the cover, which is beautiful. Every book has just full of such great art created by another one of my friends, Isaac Stewart. He did the maps and a lot of the art. Another great guy. Just overall, if you just want beautiful books in your home, you have to get these. And I get the hardcovers when they come out, and I read through them very carefully to keep them nice. And then when the paperbacks come out, I reread these. Then I also listened to the Audible version of this just recently when I was doing my reread with, I think it's Kate reading and I can't remember that. Michael Kramer. Yeah, those guys do a good job. You know, they interchange between the male and female characters' perspectives, and it's good. It's good. Very good job. So I absolutely love the Stormlight Archives, beginning with The Way of Kings. Great series, great book. Brandon Sanderson, just 10 out of 10. Man, this series is a 10 out of 10 in mine. If you go back and you watch my top 40 fantasy series of all time, you'll see that this one ranks up there in the top, very top 5, maybe top 10, top 5, I think. Go watch that video and see, because I can't remember. But 10 out of 10 for the Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings. Everybody that's a fantasy fan, if you aren't reading this, you are missing out on everything fantasy.